It's not appropriate. It's simply not appropriate.
Tonight, First Amendment or First Commandment?
They represent God in our government institutions.
Why some Texas lawmakers want to bring more religion into public school classrooms. Plus, Joe Biden wants 4 more years in the White House. The Texans working on his re-election campaign for president. And later, a controversial proposal to ban some foreign citizens from buying land in Texas moves forward. The changes made after widespread backlash. Capitol Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. There's a push by some Texas Republicans to increase religion's presence in the state's public schools. But critics are raising concerns about violating the separation of church and state. The controversy revolves around 3 bills, including one that mandates the display of the 10 Commandments in classrooms. Such a display sits on the Capitol grounds, but this is the first push for the text to appear in schools. And as our Charlotte Scott reports, Republican lawmakers are also pressing for school chaplains.
Sherry Allen has worked in a synagogue for more than a decade, and she recently opened her own in Fort Worth.
We meet once a month at a church in the area.
Even though Allen is a chaplain, she does not support legislation that's advancing through the Texas Senate. It would allow school districts to bring in chaplains as either volunteers or paid employees to do the job of a counselor.
Chaplains are not trained in any way to, be able to counsel children in anything other than spiritual needs. There's no place for this in schools.
Allen believes the bill violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which prohibits the government from supporting a specific religion. She's concerned lawmakers are promoting Christianity, but the bill's author disagrees.
I have just one more tool in the toolbox for our public schools to be able to meet the needs of their students.
If a chaplain is paid, their salary would come from funding intended for school safety. Senator Mays Middleton of Galveston argues that having chaplains on campus can help students and teachers' mental health, thereby making schools safer.
What are the odds that a given campus is going to employ a Muslim chaplain as opposed to a Christian chaplain?
Senator Middleton says it'll be up to school districts to decide which chaplains they hire. He believes this bill stands on sturdy legal ground because last year, the Supreme Court backed a public school football coach who prayed on the field after games. Another bill that's advancing would allow a period for prayer and reading the Bible or other religious texts during the school day. A third would require the 10 Commandments to be displayed in every classroom.
This is supposed to be a country that is open to all faiths, all religions, and the ability to express them, but not in public schools. I mean, that the law is, Constitution is pretty clear about that.
A disagreement about the separation of church and state in schools that's likely to go from the classroom to the courtroom. For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
Joining us now to discuss this further is Michael Ahrens. He's a law professor at St. Mary's University School of Law in San Antonio and specializes in constitutional law and church and state. Professor, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much.
What about the separation of church and state with these bills? Do they present a violation of that?
So one reason why the sponsors of the bills are so insistent on passing these is the phrase separation of church and state is often used as a substitute for the Establishment Clause prohibition. So the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So the question for at least 100+ years has been, what exactly do we mean by that phrase, respecting an establishment of religion? And that's part of what's going on in these particular bills that are being proposed during the current legislative session.
Well, and speaking to that, I mean, lawmakers pushing them and pointing to what the Supreme Court did with the coach who prayed on the field, the ruling in that. So how does that compare? Can they compare?
So this is a case known as the Kennedy case, in which Coach Kennedy, after games, would quietly pray at the 50-yard line. And the question became, was his action the action of a private person or the action of an employee of a school? It's a kind of convoluted case, but just for your audience, I think I can summarize it in this way. The court decided that because his prayer was as a private citizen and not as a coach, That is, he was not on the clock in the sense of having to just do things related to his coaching activities. It was a violation of the free exercise clause for the school district to forbid him from saying these prayers after the end of games on the 50-yard line.
So given that, and given the fact that lawmakers are pointing to that, what kind of legal challenges would you expect from the bills they're pushing this session?
Yeah, I think the sponsors of these bills are reading the Kennedy case very, very broadly. I don't think it says what they are asking, and I think that if any of the three bills that have been proposed that have something to do with what we broadly call religious liberty, they will be immediately challenged on constitutional grounds.
Yeah. Lastly, the bills related to chaplains and the reading of religious texts, the prayers in schools. Proponents argue that they're religiously neutral. What's your response to that?
Well, if you look at the reading the Bible or other religious texts, that's probably the most neutral of all, in part because it just says something that probably is already there, which is you can't coerce anyone to pray. You can't coerce people not to pray. And what this bill as proposed would do is it would simply add another part of the day where if you wanted to, in a room that was just set aside for reading religious texts, you could do so. With regard to the chaplain issue, that's a little bit iffier, in part because the bill, though short, fails to define exactly what they mean by chaplain. And so it's unclear to me exactly what they mean. Anyone can call oneself a chaplain. There's no definition that goes to that. And then finally, with regard to the 10 Commandments in the schools, that one seems the most problematic and the most likely immediately to be either struck down or to be enjoined from enforcement.
Something we will continue to watch closely. Professor Michael Ahrens, we'll get you back on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
With about a month left in the regular legislative session, the senator who represents Uvalde is once again urging action on gun safety bills. Today, he specifically called out the governor and lieutenant governor.
I've tried everything that I can to move bills forward that are about gun safety solutions, and we've got none. And yet we have a lieutenant governor and a governor who have failed to move.
Lawmakers are pushing school safety enhancements like putting silent panic buttons and armed guards in schools. But Senator Roland Gutierrez says it's not enough and again urged lawmakers to pass the key bill Uvalde families want, raising the age to buy a semi-automatic weapon. Turning now to Capitol Hill, Texas Republican Congressman Jody Arrington was tapped by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to lead the debt ceiling fight. Arrington expressed confidence this week that Republicans will unite behind the proposal that's expected to come up for a vote in the coming days. So far, their plan aims to save $3 trillion in the next 10 years, reclaim unspent COVID funds, and roll back President Joe Biden's student debt relief plan. President Biden has already threatened to veto the bill if it passes. President Biden officially announced his re-election campaign today, asking voters to give him more time to finish the job. It comes as he faces attacks from Republicans on his policies and concern from some Democrats about his age. Kevin Fry is in Washington with the details.
President Joe Biden addressing union workers after announcing his re-election bid. Biden's long-teased campaign launch came Tuesday morning in a 3-minute video posted online. In it, Biden railed against so-called MAGA extremists loyal to former President Donald Trump and offered a stark warning about what he says is at stake in 2024.
The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too.
Ahead of the announcement, an Associated Press poll showed only half of Democrats wanted Biden to run again, many citing Biden's age as a concern. Biden is already the oldest president in U.S. history. He turned 80 in November, and if re-elected, he would be 86 at the end of his second term. In an interview with Spectrum News, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, a co-chairman of Biden's campaign, dismissed those concerns.
He is as sharp and capable of leading this nation today as he has been at any point in the last 50 years of his public service.
We can now call the 2024 presidential race for Joe Biden.
The GOP launched its own video, painting Biden as weak and warning of a, quote, nightmare future if he's reelected. Biden's candidacy sets up a potential rematch with Trump, the frontrunner for the Republican nomination. That possibility has helped to unify Democrats behind Biden's candidacy, although some voters are yearning for a different choice. Former Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, expected to run for president as an anti-Trump Republican, weighed in this way.
No one wants a Biden-Trump replay of 2020. It was painful then, it would be painful again.
Biden faces nominal challenges for the Democratic nomination. In recent weeks, he's been on the road touting his legislative accomplishments at official events. Among those accomplishments, the infrastructure law. Expect more of that in the months to come as the campaign gears up. In Washington, Kevin Fry, Capitol Tonight.
President Biden is bringing in El Paso area Congresswoman Veronica Escobar as a co-chair of his reelection campaign. Naming a Texan to his team could mean President Biden could be making a bigger play for the state than in 2020. Escobar has historically been outspoken on immigration, border security, and gun violence, all of which are expected to be top issues in the 2024 election cycle. A new report shows that Texas has banned or restricted the most books during the first half of the school year. According to the nonprofit PEN America, most of the books targeted are written by and about people of color and people in the LGBTQ community. This report comes just days after the Texas House passed a bill that would remove books from school libraries if they're considered harmful or sexually explicit. It now heads to the Senate. And still to come on Capitol Tonight, targeting textbooks, how some Texas lawmakers are trying to expand the book ban efforts from the library to the classroom. Plus, restricting land purchases. A controversial bill to limit who can buy property in Texas passes the Senate. Welcome back. Let's get a check now of some of the other political stories making headlines across Texas. The Texas House passed a measure requiring all state prisons to be kept between 65 and 85 degrees. 2/3 of Texas prisons don't have air conditioning in all inmate housing areas. According to state data, between 1998 and 2012, the heat contributed to the deaths of at least 23 inmates and caused heat-related illnesses for dozens of prison guards. The Texas Education Board could ban textbooks that discuss gender identity. Conservative state lawmakers are pushing a bill that would allow the board to reject textbooks for students below 9th grade if they include content on sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual activity. The board could also restrict books that don't present U.S. history in a positive light. And the state Senate gave initial approval to a bill that limits the sale of Texas farmland to citizens and entities associated with China and several other countries. The bill was watered down after months of outcry from Asian American groups and others who said it would make it impossible for dual citizens and other immigrants to buy homes or start businesses. The bill's author says it's about protecting national security. Governor Abbott has said he will sign the bill. Let's bring in our political analyst now. Joining us this evening, Republican Ted DeLisi and the chair of the Travis County Democratic Party, Katie Naranjo. Good to see you both.
Good to be here.
Let's talk about the legislature. Time's ticking, of course, to get all of the work done. But this feud between Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Speaker Dade Phelan continues to just be ramped up. But at least they're bringing some humor to it. Let's show the tweets that they put out today. So this all stems from an interview that I did with Lieutenant Governor last week, a week ago today, where he was talking about the property tax relief proposal and kind of their differences over this. And here's what he said.
No, the appraisal caps, and we don't have time to explain it, Karina, they're not a factor essentially anymore in a person's tax bill, number one. Number two, it doesn't benefit any senior at all, which are 40% of homeowners. And third, California Dade wants a California tax plan or a New Jersey tax plan.
So the California date is where all of the surfer memes are coming from, or the Photoshop, or whatever you want to call it. Ted, what do you think is the likelihood that they come to some kind of agreement on this property tax bill, at least within the regular session?
I don't think the differences are as significant as the tweet wars would suggest. I don't think they're that far off programmatically on kind of where they are on the overall amount that they're going to spend. I actually think that property taxes are trade bait for what's really happening, which is the House and Senate are far apart on vouchers. And to me, you know, you cannot, you basically have to have trade bait. I think trade bait is the budget. I think trade bait is the property tax relief. But I think what's really going on this session is that Patrick and Abbott, we're seeing Abbott more aggressively wanting empowerment, parental choice, however you phrase it. So I think that's what's really going on, is that we're starting to see the end game really come to fore, and you have to hold some cards. Some of this stuff is a distraction. I'm glad we didn't get to see Dan Patrick's abs. This is something I think we can all agree on in a bipartisan way. Well, you know what? We don't want to know. That's my whole point. We don't want to know.
He did give credit to Dave Phelan for being more fit. He did. Well, Katie, with that being said, I mean, vouchers is a big priority for the lieutenant governor, but the House less enthusiastic. I mean, are there any concessions you think that could be made that the House would get on board with this?
It seems when you have 24 Republicans joining Democrats and voting essentially, you know, on an amendment to the House budget that said you have to use public funds for public schools, that there is not consensus within the Republican Party. It was even difficult to get the vouchers bill passed out of the Senate. The Senate didn't even have agreement on it, and it was a kind of an 11th hour pitch hit to get it passed in the Senate. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in the House. The reality is it's a tax grab to fund private schools. And Texas teachers and the 24 Republicans from across the state that joined Democrats to stand up for public schools, they don't have the policies in place and or the bargaining chips in place to bring those Republicans back over yet.
We're quickly running out of time, but I want to turn to President Biden announcing his re-election campaign. Katie, I'll stick with you real quickly. I mean, how excited are Democrats about this? Because I know we've heard kind of the concerns about President Biden's age, among other things.
I think that's the one thing that people want to bring up, because Democrats otherwise are united. And being a Democrat in Texas my entire life, it's really entertaining to see the Republicans fighting now and the Democrats unified for once, thank God, around a candidate. When it comes to President Biden's work to keep the economy strong, to make sure that we are investing in climate infrastructure that helps in terms of American jobs and climate change, he has a record of being the American president that we all are looking for, that brings consensus and helps to build rebuild a divided government. And so I think Democrats are very excited about that going into 2024.
Well, Ted, former President Trump is favored right now. I mean, what about a potential Trump-Biden rematch?
It could happen. You know, I do think that the Biden economy presents a weakness for the current president that he didn't have to engage in when he ran for the last run-up. But there's a lot of this race yet to happen. I'm not willing to say that it will be a Trump-Biden matchup, but regardless, if it's someone like a Nikki Haley, a Tim Scott, a Ron DeSantis, I think that this president is in a lot of trouble, because I do think a strong generational and energy change could be part of a theme. And honestly, I think even Democrats know that, you know, there are many Democrats that have reservations about whether this president has it in the tank to go on another campaign.
Ted, Katie, we'll have to leave it there. A lot of time to talk about this one. So still to come on Capitol tonight, we continue our conversation about the 2024 presidential election. The group of voters expected to become an even bigger battleground. Welcome back. A projected increase in young, unaffiliated Hispanic voters in Texas and other large states is expected to make the Hispanic vote an even bigger political battleground in next year's presidential election. Our Washington correspondent Rena Diamante reports.
As the 2024 presidential campaign takes shape, some advocacy groups predict the Latino vote will be an even bigger political battleground than it was in last November's midterm elections and the 2020 campaign.
Our median age is about 10 years younger than for the rest of our fellow Americans. And every year, approximately 1 million Hispanic citizens are turning 18 and becoming eligible to vote.
Recent analysis from Televisa Univision examining the 2020 midterm elections found first-time Latino voter growth was driven by younger voters in 6 key states, including Texas. The data found these voters are increasingly unaffiliated as well.
They are our today's leaders and our future leaders, so we want to make sure that we're reaching them and having those conversations up front and building that trust and empowering them to be civically engaged.
Deanna Maldonado is with Jolt Texas, a civic engagement organization working to build the influence of young Latinos in Texas. They work on voter registration and educate young Latinos about how to mobilize.
It's about going a non-traditional way of how to get the vote and why to vote. And because the traditional way does not resonate with the culture, does not resonate with Latinos, because for far too long they've been forgotten.
And with a key Senate race set to take place next year, some believe there's an opportunity for Texas voters, especially young, unaffiliated Latino voters, to play a significant role in determining the balance of power in Congress.
Hispanic voters are playing a critical role in defining the political landscape in local, state, and national races. We have seen this certainly in deciding Senate races in places like Arizona, Nevada, and California, but we are seeing it increasingly across the country.
Some advocacy groups say with Latino voters representing a swing element in some elections, it's a signal to both parties they need to engage early and consistently in order to truly win over their support. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capital Tonight.
We're going to thank you, and that is going to do it for this edition of Capital Tonight. We are back tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay safe and have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.